us today. We give homage to the Creator, who is like our Father and who is like our Mother, who is everything that we can perceive and everything that we cannot perceive, who is everything and yet is no thing, who comes to us in the form of the Netzru Ra, who is the light of the heavens, light of the inner planes, as well as the light of our lives, who shines the light for us on the path of Ma'ati, which is the path of truth, justice, righteousness, and harmonious balance, who comes to us in the form of the light of vitality, giving us the strength and the endurance to live and act upon that which we know to be true. Homage to you, the one who shines in and through us as a beacon of light for those who are blind to the facts of their place, their position, and their responsibility in the divine scheme of things. May we be Ma'akeru, true of thought, word, and deed, to our highest reality. And in the moments of crises and the dark nights of the soul, when it appears that everyone and everything else has let us down, so it is and so shall it be. Everyone say, Amen Ma'at. Amen Ma'at. Ma'akeru. 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 MC. Kefresh, can you turn that off? Sure. Are we back? Are we on Facebook and YouTube?
True.
Greetings, Facebook and YouTube, to our first communion of the year. This one's going to be a short one because we do have a ceremony to celebrate after I share a few words. And as per usual, we do not air our ceremonies online out of respect for reverence of ritual and in order to honor and really condense the energy within this sacred and safe space. So I encourage you all to come out and join us in person for our rituals and our ceremonies and celebrations. The next time we have a major ritual will be Henek Ma'at, which will be the first communion in April. I believe it's like April 2nd is the date. So those of you who are local, or maybe not super local, but a couple hours of drive, or maybe even capable of putting some money aside and taking a flight every now and then, that would be the date to aim for in order to be here with us, to celebrate with us in person. And it really is essential to have opportunities where we have in-person rituals and in-person celebrations and ceremonies, because one of the reasons why we've come together is to encourage spiritual community, right? I believe it's April 2nd, yes. And all the initiates should know that because I did send out a calendar for the year. And it's also on our website, a full calendar of all of our dates for the year. So do want that too. But yes, one of the main important things while we're here is to reinforce and to build spiritual community. And the energy that we get and we feel when we're here in this room together, those of you who are online, unfortunately, like you just can't, it's just not the same. Like we was here for the Feast of Sekhmet just a week ago, really. And it's the first time we celebrated the feast in 3 years. It was incredible, it was beautiful. It was like the energy was so live, high, and bright. It was just amazing. I'm just super, super grateful that we finally got a chance to get that off the ground. And I'm hoping to our Netter that we won't have any more breaks in our celebration. I'm going to share a few words today about the reading of the year. I'm not going to talk about the symbols in the reading and things like that because I did that already. If you would like to know the reading of the year and the details of the symbols and things like that, I do encourage you to go to our website and get the digital downloaded in audio form that you can listen to in your car or like a podcast in your home, etc. So I will encourage you all to do that. But I do have some specific charges and things that I want to add on. Just to give y'all some context, when I do the reading, I don't record it in live time. Like I have like a whole ceremonial thing that I do to open the way and to connect with the Neteru to allow their voices to speak. And so I do all of that super, super privately. And then like 10 minutes after I've done all of that, I like hit record and I start talking. And so it is very, very, very much like the in the moment interpretation of what the Neteru, what Jehuti has asked me to communicate. And so what I want to share today is just some additional insight that has come since that recording. and just to give you all not just some additional insight, but also some specific action items as well. Because I do realize that after I went back and listened to it, I was like, man, I didn't give y'all nothing, no homework. There was no homework in this recording, so I'm gonna give y'all some homework today. One of the things that I want to share first is that I was amazed. I follow other priests and priestesses of other African traditions online, and one of the priestesses that I love, she said she was going to do her reading of the year live, so I was like, okay, I'm going to watch it. I'm just curious and interested and supportive of her. And so I went, and she is an Ifa, so she is a priestess in the Ifa tradition. And so I went and I watched her recording on YouTube, and she said the exact same thing that I said. Wow. Like, I was like, dang, I said that too. Dang, I said that too. Like, and she used the traditional oracle system, divination system of her tradition, of Ifa, okay? And of course, she spoke about it in terms that differ from the way that we speak about it, because she doesn't use the word ma'at. That's a Kemetic term. She doesn't use that term. But she talked about balance. She talked about harmony. She talked about righteousness. When you use those terms, you're talking about ma'at, right? Mm-hmm. There was a lot of emphasis that came up in her reading about ancestors and doing ancestor work. That was a lot of what came up in our reading as well. So as she's speaking, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is almost exactly the same reading. And I was yet again floored by the power of the Neteru, right? Like, because that's all it is. It's just verification that spirit is real, and that when spirit speaks, like, you either tapped in and you're listening, or you got to check and make sure it's not your ego, right? Like, if we're tapped in and we're listening, we're going to get similar messages, right? Like, the Neteru not going to tell me to create peace and tell you to create chaos. That doesn't make any sense. So if we're getting similar messages, then we understand that we're all tapped into the one, because it is the one. And if there's only the one, then we shouldn't be getting conflicting messages or memos or insights or information or differing destinations or different, you know what I'm saying? Like, it shouldn't be that much of a conflict. So not that I doubted anything about our reading or anything like that, but it was still just powerful and confirming to hear that. And I was just super grateful that the Neteru directed me to her in that moment. Like, because I don't usually watch other people's readings. I just was like, why not? And then it was super, super confirming. I was really grateful for that. So before I get into the specific charges, I have two things that I want to add that are one is for the Saru, and the other one is for the initiates of the Temple of Nu specifically. Firstly, to the Saru, there's an emphasis this year on the energy of Keper, specifically for the priests and priestesses of the temple. I did not, when I did this, ask about whether or not this applies to other priests and priestesses. I asked about the Saru, so this is for the Saru, okay? And the energy of Keper came through with the key word of transmute. And I want to use that word specifically differently from the word transform. We usually use the word transform to talk about Keper. And they're very similar terms. They both imply like a fundamental change that's not superficial, right? Something that's like deeply or dramatic change. But where transmutation is a little different is one, transmutation as a term or concept. When I see that word and I think of that word, the first thing I think about is the processes of alchemy, right? When you're literally taking lead and transmuting it into gold. You're taking a substance and you're not just changing it. Like if you take a block of lead and then you make it into like a banister or a railing, right? That's transformation. But if you're taking this block of lead and it's becoming something completely, like it's now gold, it's not even lead anymore, that's transmutation, right? And so the thoughtfulness around the process of improving the substance in terms of making it something that's a higher vibrational than it was before, in terms of elevating the energy. And so the insight there about how our lives are transforming, shifting, changing, growing, evolving, elevating, but then also how the charge as priests and priestesses is about how we facilitate, support, and assist the transformation and transmutation of the lives of the people who come to us for guidance and insight and support, right? How is it that we are open to facilitating and allowing ourselves to be grown? And then also, how are we directing and supporting the growth of the people who are placed into our charge, right? And so I do want to encourage Mr. Root to reflect on that. And again, in context with the rest of the reading. For the initiates, there is an extra charge in context with the rest of the reading about love. And I really, honestly, like 90% of what I'm about to say is going to sound very similar to what my Becky Sacha said. And that's okay, I don't mind repeating. But there's this heavy emphasis on love, and not just romantic love, but really unconditional love, self-love, communal love, like brotherly love, sisterly love. And yes, romantic love is a part of that too, not to think that it's not a part of the equation. But one of the questions that the initiates are charged to reflect on this year is that if I love myself and you are a reflection of me, then what does our relationship look like? Okay? And thinking about and seeing how if we are all, again, one with the all, right, then my decision or my desire to love myself and to accept myself must mean also finding ways to accept. We talk about shadow work and accepting the incongruent parts of ourselves. How do we love the other person who has incongruent, like parts of themselves that we don't like? Right? It's parts of you that I find unattractive, that I find frustrating, that I find to be annoying, that get on my nerves, that I don't like. How do I love you anyway? As part of loving myself and seeing you and I both as extensions of the divine, as extensions of the Naturuth, right? And so that is part of the extra work, right, for initiates this year to do, is to think about love and how that shows up in how it is that we make our choices. So with all of that in mind, here are some of the concrete actions that the reading of the year encourages each of us to take. First and foremost, if you are not already engaged in daily libation offerings to your ancestors, if you're not already offering food to your ancestors on a daily basis, this is the year to do that. That's the first and foremost charge. Many of you are already doing libations, I'm sure. But if you're not doing them or you're not doing them every day, this is the time to do it every day. This is the time to also, again, increase to do more than just libations, to make plates of food. Now, those of you who are newer to the tradition may not feel as confident or comfortable pouring libation for the first time. Like, what am I supposed to do? Let me not intimidate anybody and just acknowledge that pouring libation is literally taking water and pouring it into a plant, onto the ground, into another vessel to say, this is the water that I wish to quench the thirst and the need of my ancestors because I love them so much that I want to send this energy to them. That's all you have to say. I have righteous ancestors who I would like to bless with my love. And so here's this water that is a representation of my love, a representation of my energy, a representation of my gratitude, to the righteous ancestors of my line. We always clarify and say righteous ancestors in case people are concerned. They have family members who they don't want to feed, who they don't want to acknowledge for whatever reason. That's totally fine. If you say righteous ancestors of the light, then you don't have to worry about the non-righteous ancestors of the dark. They ain't gonna be a part of that, all right? So no need to worry about that. But for those of you who've never done that before, that's the easiest place to start, is to pour water into a potted plant that you have at home or into a cup or bowl while saying, I give this an offering to my righteous ancestors of the light in gratitude for everything, okay? Making a plate of food is also a way to feed our ancestors. And again, the simplest way to do this is to make a plate of your food. In some cases, people will make special food, right, for ancestors. Like, my grandmother really loved ham hocks, so I'm gonna make ham hocks, but I don't eat pork, so I ain't making that for myself or my family, but my grandma liked ham hocks, so what, right? Like, there are some people who will encourage you to do that. But that could become, in a modern lifestyle, that could become real prohibitive, right? You gotta make a meal for yourself and your family and then make separate meals. And so what ends up happening, if you start getting intimidated by that, is then you start not doing it. Right? And that's actually the worst thing you can do. It's better to do something than to do nothing at all. Okay? So rather than making separate meals, if that's too much work, don't make separate meals. Take a portion of what you're already making, or even if you're picking up food, I guess we do eat out sometimes, hopefully it's not McDonald's, but even if you are picking up food, that you taking a serving off of the food that you've ordered, putting it on a separate plate, and allowing your ancestors to sit down at the table next to you and your family, right? You can put that plate at the table, like at a place setting where like your grandma would have sat if she was there. Like if you had an elder with you in your home, where would they sit? Put it there. If you don't have an extra place setting or an extra seat at the table, put it in the center of the table, okay? And that's another really simple way to give energy to your ancestors. And to do it daily, because we're all eating on a daily basis. I can tell y'all are very healthy people. All right. All right. So the second charge, specific charge of the year, has to do with planning for our future. So the charge is to create, review, or improve your current retirement plan, to invest in a life insurance policy, and to finalize your will or bring it up to date if you already have a will. All right? Now, there's two reasons why this charge is important. The first is because this reading of this year asks us to honor our ancestors, and those of us who are Kemetic, our ancestors were forward-thinking. Egyptologists make this mistake of saying that the ancient Kemetic tradition was focused on death. And that is completely incorrect. And it is a statement that's said by people who don't know us, right? Our ancestors were deeply concerned with life. And not just life, but with the continuation of life. And so what they did by erecting monuments and by carving into stone was to ensure that their culture and their way of life could be protected and preserved for future generations. That's exactly what they did for us, and it's the only reason why we have a culture to reconstruct now, is because they had the foresight and the insight to be forward thinking and preserve for the future. So if we're honoring our ancestors this year, we cannot afford to not think about our future. We cannot afford to not think about the time when we will want to stop working and retire and how those bills are going to be paid. We cannot afford to not think about the burden that will be placed on our children or grandchildren when it comes time to lay us to rest, right, and to support our transition to the West. We cannot be failing to think about the eventuality or the possibility that we have accidents and hospital emergencies and things that keep us from being at 100%, and that we need to have savings, life insurance, etc., things that are going to support us if in fact we ever need to have those things, right? You can't honor your ancestors without following their example, okay? And the example of our ancestors in this tradition was to prepare so that our descendants would have what they need to continue to build onto culture. It's interesting because Nassit and I were just talking about this in the car on the way over here. We were talking about you all know that we've defined, or the CIT has defined culture to be survival strategies of a people. Yes, y'all heard that before?
True.
And so when you think about what that means in practice, right? Survival strategies evolve as time evolves, ideally, right? Because if a people first settle in a place, right, then the first concern when they settle there is this ground sustainable for farming? Can we protect ourselves from natural elements? Can we keep away wild animals and protect our young and elders from being attacked by wild animals, right? These are basic, like, I want to live in the wilderness concerns, right? And so then we invest in that, right? We invest in that, we build farms, we build walls, we get weapons, we do what we need to do, we secure ourselves, we're safe, right? And we're surviving. And now we go to the next level. When someone gets sick, do we have the right herbs to, right? You can't take care of somebody with a common cold if you're in the middle of fighting off bears and wolves, right? That's not, the bears and wolves is priority, but once you master that concern, then you start thinking about, how do I make childbirth easier? How do we survive common colds? How do we educate? How do we communicate? How do we write things down, right? The longer that you sustain yourself as a community, as a civilization, right? Ideally, the more your concerns progress, because you deal with the basic concerns, and then you can deal with the next level of concerns, and then you elevate to the next level of concern, and then you elevate to the next level of concern beyond that. If you've been a civilization for 500 years and you still having to beat back wolves and bears, that's not very efficient, right? And that means that your culture has not evolved. So culture is meant to evolve with us. We are meant to evolve, right, over time. We are meant to deal with our basic foundational human concerns, safety and sustenance, and then once those are taken care of, then our thoughts can elevate and can progress to the point of having deep thoughts about philosophy and investigating science and writing books for entertainment and education and things like that. Things that people will consider to be signs of high civilization. You can't get to high civilization until you first make sure people are safe and people are fed. Okay? So ultimately, again, the reality is because our culture has to evolve, we have the right to take the lessons of our ancestors, not just the right, the responsibility to take the lessons of our ancestors, to understand their purpose in the context of the time and place where they existed, and then take the meaning and the core, the essence of that, and apply it in ways that make sense for where we are in the here and now. Today, none of us are fighting wolves and bears on a regular basis. It's just not happening. So that's not, right? Like, if we were to read a text, that'd be like, this is how you fight off wolves and bears. Like, we're like, well, how do I take that insight and use it in a way that makes sense to me? How do I use it in a way that metaphorically talks about how I beat back evil? How do I take that in a way that allows me to understand how I make my brothers and sisters feel safe? How do I interpret that in ways that help me to understand not to take security and safety for granted, right? So not so much about the animals themselves, but about the concepts that are at the core of that, all right? And so that's why we have this charge to make sure that we're investing in the future. The next part of the charge is about investing in our health. In particular, our emotional health and our energetic health. So this is gonna be a year of going to therapy. This is gonna be a year of meditation and grounding, of journal work, of tapping, and again, that key word, shadow work. I found myself, as I was thinking about shadow work and how we've already defined shadow work as having the courage to deal with the incongruent parts of yourself, or even again, the decision to fully integrate your shadow as yourself, to love your shadow as yourself, to not be angry, disappointed, or negative towards parts of yourself. Because how can you sit fully in self-love if you don't like parts of yourself? And so that took me to the question about what is different between self-care and self-love. And we can define self-care as making the time to feel good about yourself. The actions and the choices that you take on a regular basis that allow you to feel good about yourself. And self-love is loving yourself unapologetically and unconditionally. So to be clear, it is self-care, it is nurturing, like Wabek Pisa said, that reinforces and sustains self-love. But nurturing, you choose to do self-care because you love yourself, right? Out of self-care, you can say, I'm going to create these boundaries for myself. That's self-care. But you enforce those boundaries because you love yourself, right? And that's where the evidence of the self-love comes in, because it's easy to say, I'm going to create boundaries. I'm not going to let anyone treat me a certain way. I'm not going to. It's easy to say those things. It's easy to affirm, I'm going to take time every week to take a spiritual bath. I'm going to, whatever it is that you choose as a demonstration of self-care, it's easy to affirm that, to say that that's what you're going to do. Self-love is following through on that affirmation. Self-love is living yourself into that. Self-love is enforcing that. And so the journey this year of healing reinforces that charge to invest in love, to invest in self-love as well as communal love, as well as universal love. Because again, all are interconnected. The next charge is to sit at the feet of elders and teachers. It is, I know, we didn't talk at all. Becky said I did not plan this, but that is the charge though, because again, those of you who listened to the reading, y'all know we talked about studying as part of the reading. Again, I encourage y'all to go back to hear the rest of the context. And I think it's important to acknowledge that submitting to elders and teachers is part of the specific charge, because otherwise, sometimes we get too clever for our own good and we start deciding we're the only authority that we need, right? And that is a dangerous place to be, because then you have no frame of reference about, like if you were going to a martial arts, like you were gonna go learn martial arts, right? And you just watch the video online and you just be doing the kick. You're like, I'm doing the kick. I'm doing the kick 30 times a day. Then you get in front of the teacher and you show the teacher the kick and they're like, yeah, you was doing that wrong. You've been doing it wrong for 3 months and I have to totally reteach you the kick, right? Like you had your knee out like this. You're supposed to have your knee in. You're supposed to turn, right? To turn your kick, right? You think you're doing it correctly. You think you've got it down. And then you get in front of a teacher and the teacher is like, nah, son, that was close. Right? That was real close, but no, you're doing it wrong. And I know I've had those experiences in dance where you go to practice and you're like, yeah, I got this. And you get in that private session and you're like, yeah, teacher, let me show you. And she was like, your toes is not pointed and your leg is not straight. And I'm like, dang, I just practiced it for 3 weeks incorrectly and I'll start all over, right? So the value of getting in front of your teachers and your elders is for guidance, direction, and confirmation. Okay? It is to ensure that you don't do the correct actions incorrectly and make that a habit and a pattern. It is to ensure that you're taking the right actions for your self-development, because we so busy on the internet taking tips off of everybody else and you doing something that's not even good for you to be doing at this stage of your evolution. Make no mistake, what that person is doing could be very beneficial to their growth and their process and have nothing to do with what you need in this moment for your process. Right? And so your elders and your teachers are the ones who can help you to focus on what you need and not like the popular thing that everybody's doing or the fad that you're seeing in the Instagram reels or what have you. What is it that you specifically need in this moment? And then can we make sure that you understand what that looks like and let me assess and make sure that you're doing it correctly so that you get the fullness of benefits from that experience. Lastly, the last charge of this year is to avoid excess. Now that's in alignment because the netzarts of the year is Ma'at, and Ma'at is about balance. So Ma'at is not 0, Ma'at is not 10, Ma'at is in the middle. Ma'at is 5. And it's interesting when Wabet Kisa talked about this year is a year of taking risks. And I acknowledge that that's not really a conflict. Well, it's never a conflict when we're talking about things. It's a matter of putting it in context, right? Some of us are excessive in terms of being extra when we're already not in alignment with the will of the Neteru. When we're already not living in alignment with the all, right? So now the actions that you're taking are creating even more chaos and creating even more disorder in your life and creating even more problems for yourself. If you are surrendered to the will of Neter, if you are fully into your connection with the all and immersed in that and following the lead of the Neteru, following their guidance, listening to your elders, studying the traditions and the patterns of your ancestors and applying them to your life, then the risks you take are not really risks and they're not excessive. It's actually just the natural step in the evolution of your life, right? Like somebody could be like, this year I'm gonna take a big leap and I'm gonna buy a house. Well, is that a big leap if you've been saving and preparing and opening the way and studying the market and talking to realtors and comparing house prices and getting pre-approved financially and etc.? Is it as much of a risk if you've done what you need to do to put things in place the way they need to be before you take that so-called leap? See, the problem is when we get impulsive and when we don't think or when we don't do the work to put all the pieces in place. When you skip steps, when you get arrogant or filled with your ego and be like, I want this so bad and therefore it must be meant for me. But if you're really looking at all the pieces and it's not meant for you, you will get clues that it's not meant for you. And so if you listen to those clues, then you will not be acting in excess. Then you'll be avoiding excess, you'll be walking in balance. And you also will find what is the right place for you to take risks this year. Maybe the house buying is not the right risk for you to take this year. Maybe there's a different so-called risk that you're really ready for, because in that area of your life, you are in alignment, you have the pieces in place, you can surrender to the will of the Neteru for that particular item. All right, so ultimately, being or avoiding excess is about making sure that you're first and foremost devoted and disciplined in your spiritual life so that the so-called chances that you make are really just steps on your path. It might look like a risk, it looks like a leap, it looks like it's something that to other people is like, whoa, that's coming out of nowhere. But it's calculated and it's precise. And it is fully directed and guided by a power that's higher than just yourself and your ego. All right? And that's what's really encouraged this year. So that's it as far as what I want to share today. And so at this time, we're going to say goodbye. Oh wait, last thing, I meant to mention, I have a few of these in the bag. I did say I was gonna have them today. I don't have a lot, but I do have a few. So first come, first serve. This is yours. The 5 wishes document, for those of you who are online, this is a way to start to plan for your future life. Who is the person that you want to make care decisions for you when you can't? What is the kind of medical treatment that you want or don't want? How comfortable do you want to be at end of life? How do you want people to treat you? And what do you want your loved ones to know? Those are the 5 questions. And so in this booklet, you're essentially answering those 5 questions and then getting it notarized, making copies for your family members, etc., ensuring that the people around you know what you want as you get older. And especially if you get to the place, you may even still be alive, but you may not be in a place where you can continue to make your own decisions. And that's one of the main reasons why this is important. Because otherwise, you have people making decisions for you, which may or may not be the decisions you want to make for yourself. And I want to also just acknowledge that many of us come out of Judeo-Christian or Abrahamic traditions we were raised in, and we've chosen to leave that behind and come into African traditional religion, but we have family members who are still immersed in Abrahamic traditions, and who you never know whether or not they will make the decision to do something that's in alignment with their beliefs and not your beliefs, okay? And so I just want to make sure that y'all understand even why that's even more important for us who are in this so-called conscious community, those of us who are in ATR. Not that our families can't be trusted. They're going to do what they feel is best, but just because they're doing what they feel is best may not be what you wanted, all right? And if you know what you want and you want to have that reinforced, then you need to have documentation in place.
True.
All right, so at this time, we'll say Shami Amatep to those of you on Facebook and YouTube so we can get into our ceremony for the day. We appreciate the energy and time that you all spent with us for this message. We appreciate your donations that you sent via Cash App and PayPal. And we'll see you back here in 2 weeks for our next regularly scheduled communion. Shami Amatep. The cupcakes up here, I have to